Listen to the life story of the football player Fletcher Cleaves. He made no mistake, but somebody did. See to it that you're not that somebody. In a flash of blue light, the life of Fletcher Cleaves was changed forever. It was a beautiful evening after a rainy day in September, and almost kickoff time for the first NFL game of 2009. Fletcher's roommate, Dane, and he were driving back from Buffalo Wild Wings to their dorm to watch the game. He could smell those wings in the back seat just waiting for them. They were talking about what first-year college guys discuss: girls, sports, and whether the Titans or the Steelers were going to win. They were football scholarship students at Lambeth University, gearing up, full on for their first college game. As Fletcher was driving, he checked his rearview mirror when Dane suddenly yelled, "Fletch, watch out!" Fletcher realized that the oncoming car was crossing the double yellow line, coming straight at them. At that moment, he saw the woman who was driving that car. She was looking down, and the blue light of a device lit her face in the growing darkness around them. Fletcher panicked. The 1988 Samurai he'd driven in high school did not have power steering, so he had to use some muscle to turn it. But this 1999 Honda Accord had power steering. In his desperation, he didn't have time to think about power steering. He overcorrected and jerked the wheel too hard. Fletcher knew she must have been able to see in her rearview mirror the result of her decision to look down at her screen instead of at the road, but she never stopped to see if they were okay. Her car raced away out of sight, but Fletcher's car was already spinning out of control. He heard a deafening boom as they hit a guardrail, and then the car was airborne. They seemed to be floating weightless over a bridge and toward a steep embankment. It was surreal. Each second stretched out like ripples widening in a pool. He could tell that he was upside down. He remembers thinking, "Man, we're in the air for a long time." He braced for impact. After months of intense training for his first year of college football, Fletcher felt his body tensing for the toughest tackle of his life. It was like running a ball across the middle of the field when you know you're going to get hit, but you don't know exactly when. He kept expecting it, and he knew it would be bad. Yet, even though it couldn't have taken more than a few seconds for them to crash at the bottom of that deep ditch, it was like watching an eerie slow-motion playback moment from a big game. He remembers pulling his head down toward his shoulders in anticipation, but he doesn't remember the crash itself. Fletcher was knocked unconscious immediately. Fletcher doesn't know how long he was out, but when he came around, he noticed that the roof of his car had caved in. The next thing he heard was Dane's voice yelling, "Fletch! Fletch!" which immediately woke him up. In his mind, he thought he was trying to wake him up in their dorm room, and he was just asleep. But it was so dark, and all around them was a misty fog. His first thought was, "My dad's going to kill me. I just got this car." It was his high school graduation gift in June from his parents. He tried to roll over, but he couldn't move. He was pinned under the roof of the car, lying on his right arm. Then Fletcher tasted mud and leaves, and he began to realize he was in a serious situation. Dane was trying to get him out of the car, but he was so badly injured himself, he couldn't do it. Why wasn't Fletcher feeling any pain? Why couldn't he move? Then he had a thought that made his blood run cold. If it started raining again, that ditch could flood, submerging them in brown, muddy water. He couldn't seem to turn his head to see anything out of the window, but out of the corner of his eye, he saw moonlight glinting on a large puddle of water very close to the car. He tried not to panic, but when Dane said he was going for help, he begged him, "Please don't leave me here by myself. I don't want to die." "Fletch, we got to get out of here," he said. "I promise you, I'll be back." Then he was gone. Fletcher couldn't help but cry. It was terrifying being down there all alone like that, hidden from the road above, as evening darkened around him, and the sound of cars going by became less frequent. Fletcher wanted to scream for help, but for some reason, he didn't have power in his lungs or throat. It seemed like an eternity being trapped there, unable to move. He thought about his parents, and wondered if this was how his life was going to end, stuck in a car at the bottom of a ditch, here in Jackson, Tennessee. Other thoughts raced in his head, as if his brain was spinning out of control. How is he going to get out of here? They've got practice in the morning. Is he going to be able to play football tomorrow? What's wrong with his legs? Tears rolled down his face. Fletcher calmed himself by saying, "Come on, man. You've been working out all this time. You should be able to muscle your way out of this car. Come on, Fletcher. 1, 2, 3. But nothing. He figured his legs must be broken. But how could that be if he didn't feel any pain? How could he reach his parents? How badly was he hurt? He thought about his family, then about his friends from high school and his teammates. At last, he heard the sirens of the ambulance. Then the voices of the ambulance driver and the paramedics at the edge of the ditch. Someone yelled, "Is anybody down there?" He thought he was yelling back, "Down here!" But he couldn't raise his voice at all. Someone else said, "Hey, I see somebody down there. Are you alive?" Fletcher wanted to say, "No, I'm speaking from beyond the grave." And he thought, "Are you alive? What kind of question is that?" The floodlights from the ambulance were so bright in that dark ditch that Fletcher had to squint as he heard people racing toward him. They used the jaws of life, a hydraulic tool that pries metal apart to open cars in emergencies, to get him out. As Fletcher was lying on his right side, they had to pull him out of the car by his left arm. That was the first time he felt pain in his arm and his neck, and he yelled, "Please stop! Please stop! Something's wrong!" They hoisted him up the steep climb in a gurney with some type of crane. In the back of the ambulance, a young woman examined him. Fletcher felt her touching his neck. Then he could hear her going through his pockets, but he couldn't feel a thing. He was thinking, "Wow, that's weird. She asks so many questions. Where are you? Do you know what happened? What's your name? Can you move your arm?" "Yes, I was in a car crash. My name is Fletcher Cleaves. I'm 18 years old," he said, trying to steady his voice. He moved his right arm for her. "Can you move the other arm?" He moved his left arm. She said, "I want you to move your right leg." He moved his right leg. Then she paused. She said, "Please move your right leg." And he said, "I did." She paused again. "Okay," she said. "Move your left leg." He moved his left leg. Another pause. Then she said it again. "Can you move your left leg?" "I did," he said, feeling confused. She didn't meet his eye, but he saw her look of concern. "Okay," she said. "We're going to take you to the emergency room for some tests." That's when he knew that something was very much wrong. She talked with someone in a low voice, and then she said, "We think you might have broken your neck." Immediately, Fletcher asked her to call his parents. Little did he know that the hospital staff had already called them, but because he was older than 18, they could only inform his parents that he was in a car crash, and that they should come to the hospital right away. HIPAA privacy laws restricted the staff from providing any more details. By the time Fletcher called them, his parents were frantically driving from Jackson to Memphis. His dad was so relieved to hear him sounding coherent that he didn't seem concerned at all when he told them that he broke his neck. At that time, none of them knew exactly what that might mean in terms of recovery and long-term disability. In the kung fu movies that Fletcher watched, a guy would break his neck and immediately fall dead, and that was that. So, the fact that he had broken his neck and he was still talking didn't make sense to him. Even though his dad was just as confused as he was, he told him, "Fletcher, when we got the call from the hospital that you'd been in a crash, we didn't know what to think. But then when you called us and I heard you making sense and sounding like yourself, I knew that whatever else might be wrong, we can deal with it. We're on our way to you right now." A cold feeling of dread started in his shoulders and settled on him all the way to the hospital. At the hospital, he learned the truth. The roof of the car had caved in and broken his neck in 2 places. That was what had knocked him unconscious. So many people in white coats and scrubs were rushing around him, checking his vital signs, taking blood, and asking questions. His neck was locked in a brace to stop him from moving it, so all he could do was look up at the glare of the ceiling lights and try to stop shaking. Fletcher couldn't wait for his parents to arrive. He just wanted to see a familiar face. He didn't get to see Dane at the hospital right away, as another team was busy working on him. A doctor in the ER asked, "Are you sure you and Dane were in the same car?" He had an incredulous look on his face. "He's all banged up and you don't have a scratch on you." He told him that Dane had been ejected from the car and must have been thrown against a tree or some bushes. His arm had been so badly injured, and he was in such a state of shock, no one could figure out how he managed to climb up a steep 8-foot embankment to get help. Dane said later that he was determined to get help and felt an angel was pushing him, saying, "Come on, you have to make it. You have to make it." A young off-duty police officer found Dane stumbling in a church parking lot, soaked with blood, absolutely disoriented, holding his arm. The officer called 911, and Dane tried to tell her, "You have to find my friend. The car crashed. He's trapped down there in the ditch." She couldn't make sense of what he said because his speech was so slurred, and then he passed out. But the paramedics spotted the car and rushed down to search for Fletcher. He wished he could talk with them about it, but there was too much going on for both of them at that point. When Fletcher's parents arrived, they comforted him and kept telling him he was going to be okay. They told him that some of his coaches and other players from the team had already arrived and were waiting for news about Dane and Fletcher. The nurse announced that they had to cut Fletcher's clothes off so that they wouldn't have to move his legs or his neck. Fletcher protested. "Hey, wait, those are my favorite shorts." Right after that, one of the doctors explained, "We want to try a procedure first to see if we can realign your neck." It was called a halo, and they had high hopes that it might prevent surgery and be a solution for healing the breaks in his vertebrae. Fletcher remembers the doctor telling his parents, "You might want to look away for this part." He wanted to know what they were going to do, and they said they had to drill some screws into his head for the halo. Obviously, he was horrified. He got ready for a nightmare of pain when he heard the loud buzz of the drill next to his ear. But it wasn't that bad because he was on so many pain medications. After the halo was around his head, they attached it to some weights to try to realign his neck. They kept asking him to relax his neck. Fletcher told them over and over that he was doing all he could, that he felt as relaxed as possible, but his neck was so muscular from all the months of hard training for football that they couldn't get the bones to line up again, despite several tries. They took him in for surgery, but he barely remembered that. In fact, when he came around afterward, they told him he'd been in surgery for 9 hours, and he was amazed. Reality struck when the doctors came in and told them that Fletcher was paralyzed from the breastplate down. The first thought he had was, "I'm not going to practice tomorrow, obviously." The doctor's voices faded away as they talked with his parents. He was too busy thinking about his new reality and what he was going to do about it to listen to any more details about what he couldn't do. It was too hard to focus on the faces of all the people in the room, since his head and neck were in a brace. He could only stare up at the harsh bright ceiling lights. He felt like a piece of furniture, with everyone talking about him as if he wasn't there. Fletcher's dad had his hand on his shoulder, and he could tell he was fighting back tears. But he leaned over so that he could see his face. He said, "Remember, I told you that everything was going to be all right. Even though your body's hurt, you still have your mind and your personality." Being 18, Fletcher didn't have a lot of responsibilities yet, and his life was all about school, family, football, and, of course, girls. He'd played football his entire life, and he understood how serious this was. But all he could think about was that he couldn't play football anymore. Football's been his life since he was 7 years old. What else was he going to do? The first day after that talk was the lowest for him, as it began to sink in that Fletcher was really paralyzed. The doctors didn't hold out much hope that it would ever improve. But once they told him he wasn't going to die, he decided not to cry about it and be a man instead. Accept it and push through it. They told him what he couldn't do, but he wanted to find out what he could do. So he rallied right away. He had that brief taste of defeat, but he credits his support system, his family and friends, for helping him focus on hope. His football coach used to say, "The man who says he can and the man who says he can't are both right. Which man are you going to be?" Fletcher was going to lose momentum toward his goals. That was very evident. He was going to miss at least his entire freshman year, orientation, football season, and spring break at Daytona Beach with his friends. He was going to miss out on the life he'd planned. Fletcher knew he had to really train his body and get better so that he could get out of the hospital and back to his friends and family, to the people he loved. They had a family talk about the long list of all the things he wouldn't be able to do. He watched his mother's expression change from fear and confusion to the look of strength and determination that he knew well. It matched his own feelings and his dad's, so they all agreed that they wouldn't let that stop them. People had been telling him that he won't be able to do some things all of his life, and he had proven them wrong. He showed them that he had no intention of giving up. After the first surgery, the surgeon came in to talk with them. He said, "On the operating table, I tried to think of everything I could to fix you without surgery. I felt like I was looking at a machine when I looked at your physique. You're in such great shape. Your muscles are so defined. I hated to cut you open." After a day or two of rest, the doctors realized that a second surgery would have to be done to make his neck more stable. "I'm sorry," the lead doctor told them. "We'll have to take you in for another surgery." The look of disappointment on his parents' faces nearly broke his heart. Seeing his mother cry made him upset and frustrated, but he just wanted to get fixed up and start working on getting back to his life. Fletcher's parents prayed with him, and they all asked for a miracle. Fletcher went into the second surgery feeling nervous, because he was more coherent this time. They told him they were going to be working near his vocal cords, and he didn't realize they told his parents that he wouldn't be able to speak for a day or two. But against all odds, as soon as he woke up from that surgery, he opened his mouth and said quite clearly, "Where's my dad?" His parents were shocked and said, "They told us you couldn't speak." He said, "Well, I'm hungry. Could I have a McGriddle?" He was healing quickly from the incisions. After a few more days, the doctors felt there was no reason to keep him in the hospital because he wasn't sick. It was time for him to be transferred to a rehabilitation facility. Prior to the crash, he'd been training hard for 5 months straight for college ball, and all through high school before that. His eye was always on the prize of a professional career in football. How strange it was to discover that he wasn't getting his body in shape for football at all, but for the challenges of physical therapy ahead. Hey guys, now don't get melancholic. Here comes the twist. Look at the amazing future prospects chiseled by this optimistic, strong-willed 18-year-old young boy, Fletcher Cleaves. Just one word. Yes. One word will escape your mouth, and that is wonderful. For Fletcher, it was pretty hard to cope up mentally in the beginning. Fletcher'd been playing sports his entire life, and he had it taken away from him at the tender age of 18. He thought, "I'm going to carry this for the rest of my life. I can either wallow in the weight of that, or I can fight for my only precious life and make it an amazing story." And he chose to overcome and live a prosperous future. He did not want his accident to be the final say of his life. You know something? Fletcher Cleaves, this young boy of 18, has the miraculous power of boosting your confidence, enhancing your dreams. Just follow him. Just listen to him. Fletcher knew that he was destined for greatness, and he wanted more out of life than just sitting at home collecting a disability check. When Fletcher started telling his story to local football teams and high schools, people were inspired and asked him to share it with other groups. He fell in love with the act of motivating people and infusing them with a strong dose of inspiration. He also loved the fact that he was helping save lives by talking about distracted driving. His motivational speaking has covered a variety of topics, including overcoming adversity, focusing on your goals, and making the right choices, safe driving, the importance of education, the power of faith and forgiveness, and, of course, moving forward and moving ahead. Well, no turning back. Hey guys, look, 12 years after the accident, and Fletcher Cleaves is a world traveler, motivational speaker, college graduate, homeowner, and a Memphian who refuses to give up. Yes, don't give up. Fletcher Cleaves loves it when someone looks up at him and says, "Because of you, I didn't give up."